Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm fine tonight. Took a few minutes to share. I'm fine tonight. Took a few minutes to share. I hope you're all well. How's my sound, by the way? I've had to change my settings since the last session with Jeff, and I don't know if things are back to normal, so please let me know whether the sound is okay. Hi, Rick. Nice to see you. Hi, Dale. Evelina, hello to you. Dolores, it's great to see you. Lana and Carmen, welcome. Linda Davis, thank you very much for coming. Hello to you. And Lana says, happy Saturday from Minneapolis. GM Shower, hello. By Daniel Goheen. Welcome to you, Daniel. Dale says, sounds fine here. Evelina says, sound is fine. And Lana says, seems to be okay. Thank you all for giving me that feedback. I appreciate it. Kay is here. Hello, Kay. Okay, I think we're ready to start. First, I do want to mention something before I get into the regular business that I planned. I want to say something about the new Michael Moore produced film called The Planet of the Humans that was released on in time for the Earth Day anniversary. Okay, and Michael released this with a lot of fanfare and very heavy promotion. I was alerted to it by Lana last night since I steadfastly avoided the film until then. I'm not sure why I did. I put it on the back burner. Okay, but Lana mentioned that it was really creating a lot of angst out there. So Bonnie and I watched it last night, and I just wanted to give you an initial, very quick reaction to it. It's not actually so quick, but it's a reaction that will suffice for tonight. Do not take this film seriously, because most of the film is simply wrong. I won't say more than that now. I'll be getting back to this on Tuesday night when I'll be covering the film and criticisms of the film in detail. Okay, so I've scheduled that for Tuesday night. But don't let yourself get discouraged by the film if you happen to have watched it. When Bonnie and I were watching it last night, it actually depressed her. So nobody become depressed over this film. We will absolutely destruct it on Tuesday. Okay, this time it was just a big failure for Michael in my estimation. I mean, most of the time I love his work, but not this time. So we'll deal with it when we deal with it. Lana says, don't forget to give your YouTube and Patreon information. Thank you, Lana. And Matt Waldy has joined. Hi, Matt. And topic for today, as you can tell, friends, is reopening China debt, corporate immunity, and latest unemployment figures. That's the topic. It's actually 4 different topics, as you might perceive. Okay, my YouTube information. Okay, my YouTube information is my channel is Joseph Firestone. So go to YouTube and search for Joseph Firestone. It should take you right to the channel. And my Patreon information, okay, is at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And that should suffice. It should take you the places you need to get to. My camera's off. I hope for a quick fix. If not, it'll take a few seconds. Sorry about that. It sometimes happens. It'll probably happen a few more times. There seems to be nothing I can do to control this. I have very fast internet, and I'm cabled directly up to the internet. I don't know why this is happening. Maybe I should really check my serial ports. It may have to do with the speed of the serial port that I plugged it into. I have to check to see which is my fastest serial port and see if I plug it into that, if it makes a difference. But that will have to wait till after the show. I don't want to fool around with the hardware now. So here we are. Let's go to the first of the articles to be shared. Okay, and it appeared on Common Dreams, one of my favorite sources to spur discussion. And the name of the article is "We Need a Working People's Bailout. Unemployment Claims Hit 30 million. As many struggle to afford had necessities." And it was written by Julia Conley, staff writer over there, on April 30th. And if all is well, you should be seeing it now. I guess you are. But I guess I have the wrong sharing. I'm just shifting right over here. There it is. That's better. You can see it a lot better now, I'm sure. Okay, so you see workers lining up outside food pantries in Bed-Stuy, okay, in Brooklyn. And that's due to the unemployment that we now see. So the Labor Department on Thursday reported more than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment over the past 6 weeks. I believe that it's 30.4 is the exact figure that they have, okay, right now. And I thought it would be somewhere between 3 and 4 million people, and so it was. 3.8 million people filed for unemployment, okay, in the last week. And the recession is beginning to affect sectors that were previously thought to be far more stable than the food services and hospitality industries, which were forced to shut down last month when the virus began spreading rapidly to every state in the country. The new numbers mean 1 out of 5 Americans had filed for unemployment in the past 6 weeks. A tweet from the Working Families Party pointing that out. What I'd like to point out is that when all this started, there was 6 million people, okay, who were unemployed. It's very unlikely any of them got jobs, so we're actually talking about 36.4 people who are unemployed now rather than 30 million people. And in addition, sometimes it's estimated that as many as 12.2 million people have just fallen outside of the statistics entirely. If that figure is true, we are talking about a current unemployment rate of 48 point, what did I say? 30.6 and 12.2 is 48.8 million. Oh no, 30.4 and 12.2 is 48.6 million. So there may be as many as 48.6 million unemployed right now in the United States. There is no precedent for figures like this in modern American history, reported the Washington Post, adding that the number of jobs created since the 2008 crash and recession have now been lost. Oh, yes. I think they were lost a long time ago, actually, because the unemployment rate was only 10.4% at the maximum in 2009. And there was, at that time, there was something like 24 million people, who are unemployed, and we've now greatly exceeded that. So we're looking at depression levels, unemployment by right now. I haven't computed it, but I suspect that if we're really talking 48.6 million people, then we're talking about an unemployment rate which is higher than it was during the Depression of the 1930s. Now, we have to wait for the Bureau of Labor Statistics to come out with the official rate to see whether that is the case, but I believe that it will turn out to be the case, that we are now into the 20% and more range, perhaps as high as 25%, perhaps even as high as 30%, would be higher than anything we ever had in the 1930s. So Heidi Shierholz of the Economic Policy Institute, the EPI, says, the relief and recovery packages passed so far are not enough, and more aid is crucial. CBO projects that without additional relief, the unemployment rate will average 16% in the third quarter of this year and 10.1% for the entire calendar year of 2021. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, since we're already through the first month of the third quarter of the fiscal year, and we're already up at what looks like it might turn out to be a 30% figure. There's no way the unemployment is going to average 16% in this quarter. We are going to see most probably a rate that's in the 20%, even if the rate should go down a bit in May, and in June. But I don't think it's going to go down very far, not without passing a federal job guarantee program that people can immediately tie into. That's not going to happen. So the next package should include $500 billion in aid to state and local governments, protect workers' paychecks, include worker safety and health protections, and invest in our democracy, wrote Shierholz. And Nancy Pelosi said sometime today that state and local governments need $1 billion, in additional aid, suggesting that in this round of the stimulus, it's going to include $1 trillion worth of aid to state, and local governments, and they certainly need it. They certainly need it. Of course, Mitch McConnell, and the Republicans are going to oppose that because they're just trying to run the United States into the ground. anything to hold on to their power. It's just incredible. It's disloyal. It's unpatriotic. It's evil. It stinks, and everything else. Shearhost suggested that the federal government use one solution to help solve both the crisis of unemployment and that of the spreading pandemic by establishing a large-scale contact tracing program to detect how the coronavirus is being transmitted and to whom. And she said we must also make significant investments in testing and contact tracing because absent a vaccine or effective treatment for the virus, there's no way we'll be able to reopen the economy successfully without an effective system of contact tracing in place. It is likely that with 200,000 contact tracers, we could establish an effective tracing program. The federal government hires 500,000 temporary workers every 10 years to conduct a decennial census. We could and should do large-scale hiring of public workers for contact tracing. Well, that's fine. We certainly should do that, and that should be part of the solving things. But of course, the 200,000 contact tracers are going to make a very, very small dent in the unemployment problem that we see now. So we have to stipulate that. She continues, that is one investment that would help not just in controlling the virus and allowing us to reopen earlier, but would also help the workers who would get those jobs and their families, and therefore the broader economy. And that is true, but of course, 200,000 workers is a very small drop in the bucket compared to the 36.4 to 48.6 million workers who need jobs right now. Without adjusting the unemployment numbers for seasonal changes, as the Labor Department did, Shearholt wrote, nearly 28 million workers and 1 in 6 workers applied for unemployment benefits in the last 6 weeks. Even with these lower numbers, she said the unemployment rate is still over 5 times the worst period of the Great Recession. I don't know how she figures that, because if she's talking the rate rather than the number, okay, of unemployed, the unemployment rate in the recession of 2008-2009 rose, as I said, to 10.4%, and I don't think it's over 5 times that. If it was, it would be somewhere in the 50% range. I don't believe it's quite there yet. It's more like in the 30% range, as I said before. Some people appear to be arithmetically challenged. EPI also reported Thursday that an estimated 12.7 million Americans have already lost their employer-based health insurance as a result of the pandemic. So now, instead of having what we previously had, which was probably, contrary to popular estimates, 35 to 37 million people who did not have health insurance, most probably we now have something like 48 million people who don't have health insurance, okay, in the country. And as some of you may know, before the COVID virus, 1 out of every 781 people who didn't have health insurance were likely to die during a given year. On Thursday, Representative Jayapal of Washington reiterated her demand for Congress to pass her Paycheck Guarantee Act, which would ensure large and small businesses across the country are able to continue paying their workers' salaries of up to $100,000 per year. And so she's emphasizing that again. There's a sign. Neiman Marcus has temporarily closed. The economy shrank 4.8% in the first quarter, and that was mostly in the month of March. So it shrank by 4.8%, essentially based on March. In March, if it's shrinking the same, okay, in April, or even more, God, I don't know where we are now in terms, okay, of GDP. We might have shrunk by 15% of GDP already. It just looks like it's just absolutely looking terrible. And many analysts are saying the second quarter is likely to show a decline of 30% or more in the economy. Whoa. And Michael Whitney, former fundraising manager for Senator Sanders, said, "We need a working people's bailout immediately, nothing less." Michael said that's 18% of the entire workforce. I don't think it's 18% of the entire workforce. I could do a quick calculation on that, but I don't think I'm going to do it. I think it's more than 18%, okay, the entire workforce, especially because they're estimating the entire workforce now, as of this month, at 164 million. I think it's really more than that, but since they use the figure of 164 million, I'll use the figure of 164 million. And if we're looking at 30.4 million people out of 164 million people, yeah, that's probably right. It's probably 18%. I take that back. Okay, it's 18%. It's more than 18% if you add in the 6 million people who were unemployed before the losses recently started, since March 15th. So, of course, there's a survey by Parents Together Action showing that about half of U.S. families will struggle to pay rent or mortgage payments on May 1st. And we know that's happening. And there was a rent strike, and there were strikes all over the country calling for a moratorium on rent and on mortgage payments. And progressive New York congressional candidate Mondaire Jones demanded, quote, direct cash payments every month to Americans until this crisis is over. That's what's provided for in the Jayapal Tlaib bill that's been introduced in the House. The ABC Act, which is the Automatic Boost for Communities Act. And we've talked about that, okay, a number of times here, but that would provide all Americans with a basic income of $2,000 a month for as long as the crisis lasts, and $1,000 for each of their children, and also $1,000 a month for those same people for a year after the crisis, okay, is over. And Mondaire Jones says a one-time $1,200 check to working people is a slap in the face. It's not only a slap in the face, it doesn't keep the economy going. We can't keep the economy going for that. It is a stupid thing to do. Of course they did a stupid thing. Cruel also. So here we are. So progressives urge Congress to stop disgraceful GOP effort to grant corporations immunity from COVID-19 lawsuits. This was written by Jake Johnson. It's also from Common Dreams. And I'll share it in just a second. I neglected to share this, sorry, when I unshared the first article. So let me get it. There it is. There you are. Yes, you got it. Okay. Diverse coalition of 120 progressive advocacy groups is urging Congress not to grant corporations sweeping immunity from coronavirus-related workplace safety lawsuits, warning that the Republican-backed proposal could have devastating consequences for both employees and customers. Yes, it could. It could for customers, but of course, it could for employees as well, and with state governors basically ordering the economy to open up. If workers go and the companies they serve, okay, are able to have okay, are able to have this kind, okay, of immunity from workplace safety lawsuits, that's just giving the companies a license to kill workers through negligence. That's what it is. That's what the Republicans want, okay, to do. And the progressive groups, okay, in a letter to Congress, to leaders, said they, quote, strongly oppose any legislation that would establish nationwide immunity for businesses that operate in an unreasonably unsafe manner, causing returning workers and consumers to risk COVID-19 infection, unquote. Workers are not properly protected. Patients, customers, clients in the community are all at risk, reads the letter, which was led by Public Citizen and the Center for Justice and Democracy. And this is obscene. Public Citizen tweeted on Wednesday, and they said that Mitch McConnell thinks the most pressing threat facing our nation right now is that people might need to take company to court for doing something dangerous or illegal during this pandemic. President Trump has also voiced support for shielding companies from legal responsibility for exposing their workers to COVID-19, which is a proposal pushed by the Koch network and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Yes, our normal friends, friends of the working people, okay, and ordinary citizens are advocating a license to kill for the companies. Quote, we're trying to take liability away from these companies, unquote, Trump said. And quote again, we just don't want that because we want the companies to open and to open strong. Well, guess what? If opening strong means killing the workers, the rest of us aren't for that. According to Washington Post, the Trump administration is considering issuing a liability waiver that would clear businesses of legal responsibility from employees who contract the coronavirus on the job, unquote. Debbie Berkowitz, director of the Worker Safety and Health Program at the National Employment Law Project, condemned the idea, quote, as one of the most appalling things I've heard in the context of this crisis, which is saying something since something appalling is being proposed or said every day by this administration and its Republican allies in Congress, and lots of times also by the Democrats. The full text of the letter, is there. I'm not going to read it. It's clear the whole thing is just unfair and unjust, and outrageous and typical of this killer administration. Now, next victim. Let me share once again. Move to our next subject, since obviously corporate immunity is a terrible idea. This is a sober article which appeared in the Diplomat called Chinese Debt Relief, Fact and Fiction by Deborah Browdigam. This was written on April 15th. Evidently, this idea has been knocking around for some time, and I never noticed it until now. Anyway, the World Bank was holding its virtual spring meetings, annual spring meetings. They were virtual this time. I guess they're not always virtual, but they were virtual this time. And the COVID-19 crisis has pushed over 90 countries to ask the IMF for help. In late March, the two Bretton Woods institutions, I guess that's the IMF, yes, and the World Bank, right, called on all official bilateral creditors such as China to provide immediate debt relief to low-income borrowers. What will China do for its debtors now facing economic collapse? Some fear that a malign China will leverage this crisis to seize strategic assets. Others report that a benign China has already wiped clean many nations' debt slates. Quote, Chinese debt can easily be renegotiated or refinanced, unquote, said a Zambian economist. Our research suggests both views are far from reality. To work with Beijing to ease the pain of the spiraling economic crisis, policymakers will need to sort out the facts and the fiction about how China manages debt in troubled times. And it points out that the majority of China's borrowers are in Africa, where China made its first loan to Guinea in 1960. Today, China accounts for about 17% of African debt, okay, according to the World Bank. Points out China does not publish data on its overseas lending, but China Africa Research Initiative team at Johns Hopkins has tracked more than 1,000 Chinese loans worth $152 billion, which is actually pretty small change, I guess, when you look at it in U.S. terms. That was extended to 49 African governments and their state-owned companies between 2000 and 2018, and there's a nice graphic there. And look at all of the dollars that were extended to Angola in 2016. It's quite striking. Okay, and in many other years too, but the overwhelming amount that was extended to Angola in 2016 to help them to meet their crisis. These are not evenly distributed. Oil-rich Angola accounts for $43 billion in signed loans, nearly 30% of the total for Africa. A signed agreement with the Chinese lender is not the same as debt, however. For example, as of 2017, Congress had agreed to lend Nigeria $5.3 billion for transport, IT, and power projects, but had disbursed only $2.5 billion. Furthermore, our figures do not account for repayments. Angola has repaid at least $16.7 billion of its Chinese loans. So that's an important point. Yet in the current crisis, any level of debt risks being unsustainable. What is China likely to do? So here are some myths based on their research. A recent study of Chinese debt relief concluded that Chinese debt write-offs were common. One financial analyst called Beijing a free money machine, quote unquote, saying erroneously that over half of China's debt relief recipients had their debt written off completely between 2000 and 2018. Yes, China has canceled more than $4 billion in low-income countries' debt since 2000. However, these canceled debts, more than 356 of them, were nearly all from a small category of Chinese lending, interest-free foreign aid loans, that had reached their maturity without being fully paid off. In Africa, interest-free loans today average 10 million and make up less than 5% of Chinese lending, suggesting that probably China won't be forgiving, a lot of the regular loans that carry interest quite so easily. Myth number two, that to negotiate with China for debt relief isn't easy. China does not impose is easy. China does not impose the economic conditions, okay, that are required by the IMF or the World Bank. But the process of debt relief is not, okay, an automatic one. Beijing, a committee led by the Ministry of Finance and involving the Ministry of Commerce, the China Exim Bank, and the China Development Bank, carefully considers whether applicants for relief are truly unable to service each troubled loan on its original terms. The Republic of Congo's successful 1.6 billion debt restructuring in 2019 provided new terms for just 8 of the country's 24 Chinese loans. This complicated loan-by-loan scrutiny differs from Paris Club debt workouts, which usually treat the entire debt stock. So this is interesting. It provides a perspective on the way China treats companies, okay, in general, and it shows that they're actually pretty careful and decide what they're going to do with loans, if they're going to extend the terms or forgive loans or things like that. They decide those things on a case-by-case basis. China does not seize strategic assets in lieu of loan payments. And the article says, we saw no evidence of asset seizures in Africa or indeed anywhere among Chinese borrowers who are in difficulties with their debt. And they mention the Sri Lanka case here. I'm not going to go through that particular case, and I'm not going to also spend a lot of time on the rest of this. I just sort of finish off by saying, as the economic and financial toll from COVID-19 becomes apparent, Chinese loans and the possibility of relief from debt will continue to be in the headlines. Making sense of what China can and can't offer requires taking a hard look at some of the myths about Chinese the type of lending that China does. So, now this article then serves as kind of a background to a bigger issue which has arisen with respect to Chinese debt. And that's covered in an article from the Fiscal Times. The Fiscal Times is the rag started by the Peterson Foundation in 2010 to record the ups and downs of federal debt, okay, and deficit, and other issues concerning debt. So now to share this article, sharing the screen once more. Name of the article is Why Canceling Debt Held by China May Be, quote, worse than telling people to drink bleach, unquote. And this was written by Yuval Rosenberg, one of their main writers over there at the Fiscal Times. And so this is the other side of the coin. What we, the United States, would like to do, or some people here would like to do, is to have us cancel part of our debt obligations to China because the claim is being made that the coronavirus pandemic is China's fault and they should suffer some financial consequences for all the debts they've caused in the rest of the world, including the deaths in the United States. Now, I, for one, don't agree that China was the proximate cause of all the deaths we have had here. Of course, some of the deaths were due to the occurrence of the virus in China and the fact that we failed to stop its spread here when we had ample warning to do so, and then even after it spread to here, our response in the first weeks was so inadequate that we got way, way behind the power curve on that, and we've been behind ever since then, and have done very many of the wrong things, and as a result, as things sit this very day, we have roughly 63,000 fatalities. I did not check it this morning, but yesterday it was at 61,000, and it had been going at the rate of 2,000 per day and was pretty constant. So I'm pretty sure as of this morning it was 63,000 fatalities and continuing to go along at that rate. Okay? So it is not China's fault that we have 63,000 fatalities. It is our fault because we did not immediately institute a very, very heavy testing program coupled with contact tracing. Those nations that have done that, like Taiwan and South Korea, and that quickly closed travel with China, have managed to contain their case rates. Not talking about the case fatality rates now. I'm talking about the rates of contraction of the virus to a fairly low percentage of their populations. It can be done. It could be done. We took the wrong measures, and that's why it did not happen here. And that is the responsibility of our elected officials, not simply Mr. Trump. A lot of the responsibility does lie with him. Some of the responsibility lies with the CDC, though, because they never took the WHO tests. They had to develop their own tests, and they made errors in that. But also, some of the responsibility lies with the Congress, okay, as well, for not getting on the administration about this early and not acting in a vigorous manner. So Congress bears a lot of the responsibility as well. Now, I happen to think that the major part of the responsibility can be laid at the door, okay, of the President of the United States. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why. I don't want to start, okay, a big argument about that. But I think it should be obvious to anyone who's been watching things, okay, on a day-by-day basis and watching the silliness of this person's stupid response and continued actions, including something we'll cover going forward in just a few minutes. But the point being that this is not all China's fault. Anyway, among the ideas that have come up at this early stage, according to the Washington Post, is a dangerous one. Some administration officials have also discussed the United States cancel part of its debt obligations to China. Two people with knowledge of internal conversations said. It was not known if the president has backed this idea. When asked about it on Thursday, President Trump seemed to shoot down the possibility, saying that canceling debt could undermine the, quote, sanctity of the dollar, unquote, and that he, quote, can do the same thing, but even for money, just by putting on the tariffs. Well, I'm not sure that he can do that, but he's right saying that canceling the debt would undermine the sanctity of the dollar. But more than that, which nobody has mentioned, is that canceling the debt instruments that were bought in good faith by any other party, whether domestic or foreign, is prohibited by the Constitution of the United States. It's prohibited by the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. All debts of the United States must be honored if they are legitimate debts. And our debt instruments are legitimate debts. When the Chinese bought those debt instruments, they were making loans of dollars to our government. And those loans are outstanding. I forget what they total now, $1.4 trillion in principal or $1.6 trillion in principal. I haven't been on top of the figure lately. We owe that amount in principal plus interest due to the Chinese when those debt instruments fall due. And the Constitution does not allow us to cancel them. And Donald Trump cannot cancel them on his authority. And even the Congress cannot cancel them on Congress's authority either, because the Constitution prohibits it. The Chinese could go to the Supreme Court if they wanted to on this to enforce those contracts. Those debt instruments are contracts. Going on, quote, circulating in the right-wing media echo chamber, yes, the well-known echo chamber idiots. The Post's Tory Noonwire reports that the idea of canceling debt held by China, quote, has been circulating in the right-wing media echo chamber for weeks. That Fox News host Sean Hannity, quote, that great fiscal authority and monetary authority, Sean Hannity, mentioned it in 9 different April broadcasts, repeatedly endorsing the move, unquote. On Hannity's show, Republican Senators Marsha Blackburn, Tom Cotton, and Lindsey Graham reportedly backed the idea because, after all, when was the last time they read the Constitution of the United States? Why canceling debt would be dangerous. At Politico's Morning Money, Ben White explains why canceling debt held by China would be playing with fire. Quote, the Chinese own around $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury securities. Any move to cancel debt held by China, i.e. default on it, would destroy the full faith and credit of the U.S., sending U.S. interest rates soaring, and could ignite a global financial catastrophe. The Chinese know we almost certainly won't do this. We're not going to do it. We can't do it. We cannot do it. There's a constitutional guarantee on that debt. We cannot do it. It would be illegal. The court won't allow it. But just saying it out loud at least raises some risk. They would start dumping U.S. debt, which would be really bad for the U.S., unquote. Now, just to ease your mind on that possibility, they would not be dumping U.S. debt, because the faster they dump our debt, so-called, the lower the price of that debt would fall on the open market. Those debt instruments would not sell at face value if they were to try to dump them all at once. They could not reclaim their principal. They would be losing money. It would not make sense. They'd be much better off holding that debt and just suing in the Supreme Court. They'd start, of course, by suing in the World Court, but eventually it would get to the Supreme Court. And the Peterson Institute for International Economics president Adam Posen tells Neumeier that trying to cancel debt held by China would lead to a selling spree by other foreign holders of U.S. debt and a costly spike in interest rates. In economic terms, this is worse than telling people to drink bleach for what ails them, Posen said, unquote. Well, I don't know if I would suggest that trying to cancel debt held by China would lead to a selling spree by other foreign holders of U.S. debt. In fact, if China were to dump things, it might lead to a buying spree by those others. Because there's nothing on the international market so popular as U.S. debt instruments. So I'm not sure about the prediction that us doing that would lead to a selling spree. It might lead to a selling spree among people who are not very friendly to the United States and who are holding our debt. For example, if Venezuela is still holding any of our debt, it might lead them to sell quickly. Or Iran, it might, lead them to sell quickly if they were so foolish as to be buying our debt. But as far as nations we're on good terms with, there would probably be a lot of buyers in those nations who'd be very anxious to buy our debt. But there is one point here, and that is that our debt instruments are considered to be among the safest instrument in the world. In other words, the safest investment risk in the world. And the reason why they're thought of that way is because these foreign nations know that we cannot cancel our debt, that the idea that we could cancel our debt, is a pipe dream. And in the final paragraph of the article, Trump advisors say, no way. The risks involved in even floating the idea are likely why top White House economic officials quickly shot down the possibility of canceling debt. Quote, the full faith and credit of U.S. debt obligations is sacrosanct, period, full stop. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said, thank you, Larry. You said a bright thing for a change. Senior economic advisor Kevin Hassett likewise said to Politico that he would never, quote, he would never entertain any default on U.S. debt, unquote. Of course he wouldn't, but if it would be helpful if these people were to say, based on the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, we are not allowed to cancel U.S. debt. We cannot do it on a legal basis in the United States. Our fundamental law prohibits it, and that is the end of the story. Just in case China hasn't read our Constitution lately, they are safe. They are safe. We cannot cancel our debt. Okay, next topic. A very pregnant one. This is about reopening the economy. Now, as many of you know, the president has given the go-ahead for state governors to open up their economies. He'd like them to open it up if they think it's safe to open up. And so some of them want to open up, and some of them have announced that as of May 1st they were opening. For example, Texas announced that, in spite of the fact that on April 30th they had their highest case fatality rate on any day yet. Still, they announced they were open. Sorry, things went south for a moment. So, as I was saying, Texas opened up just the day after they hit their highest fatality rate. I did not look at the fatality rate for May 1st, so I don't know if it was even higher. But obviously, this is a state whose case fatality rate has not even peaked yet, and its virus contraction rate has not peaked either. Both of them are still going up, and Governor Greg Abbott has opened up this state. I'm tempted to say, why has he done that? Because the Republican Party is a death cult. That's why. The number of coronavirus-related deaths and the severity of the blow to the economy could vary widely, depending upon how the U.S. reopens in the coming weeks. According to a new analysis by researchers at the Penn Wharton budget model. I remind you, of course, that the famous school that graduated our current president of the United States, but Donald Trump, was the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton Business School, the source of this model, taking into account measures of social distancing, GDP growth, and changes in employment. Researchers analyzed what would happen under three scenarios. Status quo. States maintain all restrictions currently in place until June 30th. That's one scenario. Scenario 2, partial reopening, lifting emergency declarations, stay-at-home orders, and school closures. And full reopening, also lifting restrictions on the operation of businesses and restaurants. And here's what the modelers found. Status quo scenario. That is estimated to result in around 117,000 total coronavirus-related deaths by the end of June. In other words, nearly double what we have now. The economy would be about 11.6% smaller compared to a year ago, and roughly 18.6 million jobs would be lost in May and June. Notice, even not counting that extra 12.2 million jobs for the people who don't get counted because they're supposedly left the labor force, we still have 36.4 million jobs that have been lost. If we add 18.6 million jobs to that, by my count, quickly off the top of my head, that's 55.2 million unemployed at the end of June. Which assumes that the present unemployed stay unemployed. Now, that's not far different from the initial forecast on this from the Federal Reserve, was that eventually we would be at 52 million unemployed. So 55.2 million is not far from that, right? It's in the ballpark. Then there's partial reopening. That's projected to cause 45,000 additional deaths by the end of June. That is compared to the status quo, 45,000 additional deaths by the end of June, for a total of 162,000 for a total of 162,000 deaths. The economy would be slightly larger than in the status quo case, but still smaller than the same period last year by 10.7%. Roughly 14 million additional jobs would be lost, about 4.4 million less than in the status quo. Okay, so in other words, we would be looking at what? Something like 50.4 million unemployed. So, to be looking at 50.4 million people who are unemployed versus looking at 55.2 million people, okay, who are unemployed, that would cost us 45,000 additional deaths. I don't think that additional cost, okay, is worth it. Full reopening would cause an additional 233,000 deaths by June 30th compared to the status quo, for a total of 350,000 deaths by June 30th. The economy would be 1.5 percentage points larger compared to the status quo. And there would be almost no additional job losses over the next 2 months. Congratulations. We'd still have 36.4 million people without any jobs, and we also would have lost 350,000 people to the virus. What would their families and friends say about that? The researchers said the results of the analysis vary depending on individual behavior. For example, if people see the full reopening as a return to normal and seesaw social distancing in their personal lives, total deaths would come to 950,000 by June 30th. Job losses would turn into gains, with a net growth of 4.1 million jobs compared to the April 30th level. So in other words, we could cut this down to 26 million people who are unemployed. The cost in deaths would only be another 600,000 people. And Wharton professor Kent Smetters says, quote, if states fully reopen, that could be the worst case number using currently available models, unquote. So we could lose as many as 950,000 people. Well, that's better than the 2.2 million people we were projected to lose before Donald Trump did anything about the virus. So I suppose but that's an improvement. But considering that we lost 58,000 people to the Vietnam War, and that but caused us to defeat Vice President Humphrey in his run against Dick Nixon in 1968. If we do get 950,000 deaths by June 30th, I seriously wonder what's going to happen to Donald Trump. There are warnings, okay, in history concerning what happens to dictators or to unreasonable chief executives, let us say. I'll shy away from that particular loaded word. Who inflict severe damage on their populations due to ill will, stupidity, or both. 950,000 is very, very heavy losses. Don't forget, this won't be happening in a vacuum. If we hit 950,000, or if we even hit 350,000, or if we even hit 162,000 due to the partial reopening, the responsibility for that is going to fall primarily on Mr. Trump, because it was on his watch that the 162,000 fatalities would have happened. And that's, by the way, only by the end of June. That doesn't count what might happen in a second wave. That doesn't count what could happen in the rest of the year if we fail to stem the tide of this. Now, Mr. Trump is lucky because the Democrats are on the point of nominating the absolute worst candidate they could have turned to run against Mr. Trump. The weakest candidate they could have turned to. They would have been better off bringing back Hillary Clinton for another run, for God's sakes. But there is no president who has borne the burden of causing 162,000 American deaths through sheer stupidity. No. We need an extreme testing program and contact tracing program post haste. What Mr. Trump needs to do is to go to the Congress and ask for the money to do both overnight, as soon as the appropriation is available, and tell Mitch McConnell to get on board with this, okay, and say to the Democrats, we need this immediately. We have lost far too many people. We have to stem the tide now. We have to do what has proved successful in South Korea, what has proved successful in Taiwan. We have to treat this very, very seriously from this point on. And here's a warning from Anthony Fauci. On Thursday evening, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and one of President Trump's top health advisors, warned states and cities about opening too early, citing federal guidelines that call for waiting for a decrease in cases over a 14-day period, okay, among other things. There are some states, some cities, kind of leapfrogging over the first checkpoint. And I mean, obviously, you could get away with that, but you are making a really significant risk, Fauci told CNN. And quote again, I hope they can actually handle any rebound that they see. They're not handling the original. In Texas, they're not handling the original. If there's any spring back, it won't be a rebound. It'll just be a worsening of what's already the worst they've had. They have no business at all opening up that state right now. That is the height of governmental malpractice. So, and finally, we come to the last thing I wanted to cover tonight. And that is a question that follows on directly from the article I just went through. And that was in Common Dreams on April 29th. It was written by Pierre Tristan, who is a freelancer. He's not one of their writers. And he asks the question, How many deaths can we live with? And that's something we should all be thinking about tonight. How many deaths can we live with? In late March, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was criticized for saying that as a 70-year-old man at high risk from complications for COVID-19, he'd be willing to risk his own death in exchange for reopening the economy. He claims many other senior citizens think the same way. I don't know who they are. I wonder if he's taken a survey. I've never met anybody who thought that way. The criticism was severe and not just ideological, though conservatives have seized on his remarks as part of their inspiration for a more accelerated reopening of the economy. What Dan Patrick said was disturbing, especially since he spoke those words a month ago, when any reopening would have led to way more deaths than there has been. But his idea is not new. Quote, make room for others as others have made room for you, unquote. That was written by Montaigne half a millennium ago, a line echoed in 1994 by the late surgeon bioethicist of, quote, How We Die, unquote, Sherwin Nuland. Quote, we die so that the world may continue to live, unquote. Well, that may be so, but we do not die voluntarily. We die when we believe our time is up. Now, there may be some who believe that their time, is up, and who will happily go to a euthanasia. I'm not saying there aren't people who are like that. But if you're fairly healthy and you are still alive and you can make some contributions and you are enjoying your life, then you have the right to live. The world is roomy enough for you and for the rest of the world population that is now alive. And the article goes on. Not voluntarily, you say. Not true. We hardly think twice about sending young people who've not yet reached the prime of their lives to die at war. Always under the banner they're dying to protect their country, whether they really are or not. In most wars, that is not. It's sheer waste. Dan Patrick was not saying anything too different. He was flipping the tables with older people taking on the mission with ends at least more noble or defined than the death of an 18-year-old in places as ghostly as the purpose. He sees the economic collapse as an existential threat to the United States, no different than a major war. Looking at the unemployment numbers, at the cratering in the price for oil, at the elimination of entire segments of the economy, he's not wrong. No, he is wrong. The novel coronavirus is damaging the economy more than any conflict in the past century, and at this rate may exceed the damage of the Great Depression. It may. The coronavirus is not going away, and its deadliness is no longer in dispute, and nowhere near comparable to such things as the seasonal flu, as even President Trump acknowledged soberly on Monday. Quote, more than 2 million Americans would have died had there not been a shutdown, he said. And, quote, we're still going to lose between 50 and 60,000, unquote, with our guard up, unquote. Footnote, we've already lost 63,000, and according to the projections we reviewed, if we kept the status quo that we have now, we would lose 117,000 by the end of June, and that would not be the end of it. Conversely, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluations, whose models have been used across the country to measure COVID-19's peak impact on hospitals, estimates that death would have been kept at 6,000 by August Instead of the 67,000 currently projected, had stay-at-home measures been imposed in the United States just 2 weeks earlier than they were. So by their estimate, Trump's decision-making has killed 61,000 people. If this model is correct, his lousy decision-making has been responsible or will be responsible for 61,000 deaths. But that's according to the projections before the economy reopened. And that's not in conformity with the Wharton model. The Wharton model shows by the end of June a projection of 117,000, which, by the way, looks like it's on track with what's happening every day. We're seeing 2,000 deaths per day. If that rate keeps up, that means by the end of May, we're going to have 96, 2,000 a day. We're going to have another 60,000. That's going to be 123,000 by the end of May if it keeps up at 2,000 per day. It's got to start falling now in order to make that 117,000. It's got to start gradually falling now. And even if by the end of May it gets down to 1,000 per day, we're still looking at a possibility of an additional 30,000 in June. And deaths would have been kept to 6,000 by August. It's terrible, folks. So, shelter-in-place rules work, says Tristram. And with the coronavirus untamed, any reopening means an increase in the number of people who will die. There's no way around it. But there's no way around the other reality either. Yes, there is. Close to 30 million Americans are now out of work. Immense economic hardship causes suicide, domestic violence, unrelated health crises like heart attacks and strokes that have nothing to do with COVID-19. A prolonged economic crisis on the scale of a Great Depression will tally up its own body account and may damage the country's fabric in ways we cannot imagine. Dangling out of its historical or ethical context, Stan's Patrick idea is shocking, but the question it raises is the heart of the matter. It's not whether we're willing to accept a certain amount of deaths if the country is reopened. It's how many deaths are we prepared to accept. The question may seem taken from a Shirley Jackson story, but that calculus is applied in society all the time. We would not have 38,000 deaths on our roads every year if we banned driving, but no one would accept a ban on driving. Same thing with 36,000 annual gun deaths, which would be eliminated without guns anywhere, or for that matter, the 80,000 deaths from diabetes, or 100,000 lung cancer deaths, which could be significantly reduced with a ban on sugar and tobacco. No one would accept a ban on either. The comparison to a communicable disease is not exact. The risk of unknowingly catching a deadly virus is far higher in an uncontrolled environment than risk of death from behavior or illnesses that in part result from personal choice, though fatality's luck of the draw is not minor in those. The 4 deaths on State Road 100 last weekend were caused by a driver crossing the center line. His 3 victims had no chance. But you get the point. No one would accept 2 million deaths from the virus, but we did accept roughly 34,000 deaths from the seasonal flu in 2018 to 2019, even though that comparison is flawed too. No social distancing has ever been considered necessary for the seasonal flu. Clearly, there's a balance. A fatality rate we may not say is acceptable, but a fatality rate we accommodate in many ways because we recognize, as Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan put it, quote, there's no such thing as zero risk in the world in which we're living. That is quite true. The ethical challenge is in finding that balance. Radical calls for continued lockdowns or immediate reopenings aren't helping. Framing a debate in ideological terms would be worse. We'd have two camps fighting each other instead of maintaining a unified front against an opportunistic virus. The months and possibly years ahead call for plans to live with the virus while accepting a measure of risk, as in any war. But they also call for minimizing risk to the extent possible, especially when the risk is disproportionately borne by the elderly and the sick. We're learning enough by now to know that once that's put in place, the realistic, acceptable risk may end up being far lower than feared. Ingenuity does not depend on a vaccine. That means what we need, is reimagined accommodations at work, at school, and in public places, including mandatory masks in certain areas. Normalizing working away from the office as long as the work gets done. Geography is irrelevant. A more hybrid approach to education where it doesn't have to be all virtual or in person. It means an unprecedented investment in public health, starting with massive testing for the virus and its antibodies, and a far more elaborate contact tracing system tied to phone apps and real-time public dashboards. It means easily identifying those who have recovered and developed immunity and who could be working in high-risk jobs. It means a long sabbatical for normalcy. All of us, at any age, volunteering for that sort of sacrifice, rather than sacrificing elderly lives or any lives, will get us much closer to that common goal of not just flattened but conquered curves. With those assurances, the din of extremism just may have a little less appeal. Living life again a little more so, and trading any life so the rest of us may live would be relegated to the unacceptable. So, that's one of the best articles I've seen on the virus and what to do about it and how to think about it. But what I want to add here is that to accept this advice is not to generally reopen the economy now. It is to first establish massive testing for the virus, and the antibodies, and also to minimize damage to the economy. Now, how do we minimize damage to the economy? Now, I don't think that Mr. Tristram knows how to do that. Nothing in this article suggests he does know how to do that. He seems to think that continuing having so many Americans out of work is just a consequence of continuing to be cautious, and there's nothing we can do about it. But there is something we can do about it. We can immediately pass a federal job guarantee program that people can immediately tie into at a living wage with full fringe benefits. We can immediately pass a Medicare for All program for everyone. We can immediately pass a basic income for those who don't want to take advantage of the federal job guarantee program, of $2,000 per month, as is specified in the Jayapal Rashida Tlaib ABC Act. Yes, we can do that. And we can fund the very large deficits that we're going to have in doing these things by using two mechanisms. One is the minting of high-value platinum coins, as is suggested in the Jayapal in the Jayapal Tlaib Act. And also, if we don't want to do that, or if we don't want to do it on certain occasions, we can use overt congressional financing, which again is just the Congress ordering the Federal Reserve to top up the Treasury spending account with the appropriation that Congress has passed as soon as that appropriation is passed. We don't have to issue any more debt. We don't have to raise taxes to do these things. The economy is dead in the water right now. We can tell by how many people are unemployed. There is no inflation danger right now if we supply the necessary money to the economy for people to get along. And if we have a federal job guarantee, we can design jobs that involve people staying at home and working through the federal job guarantee program. That is fairly easy to do. Some of the federal job guarantee program could be fulfilled by contact tracers. That's one way that contact tracers could work, is through the federal job guarantee program. So, we can stop the collapse of our economy by doing those things. We know how to do that. And at the same time, we can do the testing and the contact tracing and the isolating that we need to see who has the virus, to see who has the antibodies, to see who has to go to the hospital, and to see who has to be treated there as opposed to being treated at home. We can do all this, but we have to use the full power of the federal fisc in order to do it. We have to use the full capacity of the federal government as a monetary sovereign, in order to do this. And we have to believe in our possibilities of thinking this through. And above all, this president and this Congress, including both its Republican and Democratic components, have to back ideas like this to get the United States out of the deep trouble that it is in. No more failures, no more austerity, no more worry concerning deficits and the debt. As I said, we don't have to issue any more debt, to do that. And the deficits can be covered by overt congressional financing and by the platinum coin or some mixture of those two funding mechanisms. So that's it. I'm now going to consider your comments. I'm not actually too late. I hope you've had a lot to say. I hope you've done a lot of shares. I hope you've appreciated this video. I certainly enjoyed it. So let me go to Facebook and begin to see. I'm sorry, I have to. Let me go back here for a minute. Let me go back to Facebook and take a look at your comments. Let me refresh the page so I can see better what's going on. Let me go back to Facebook. Okay, so here we are. Thank you for all the sharing. I see I have 248 shares. That is excellent. You've been doing a great job. Thank you very, very much for all you're doing. Sandy Degg says, It's Michelle Obama's baby. Steve says, I saw that, laugh out loud. What's Michelle Obama's baby got to do with it, folks? Russ says, I'm tracking a daily increase in reported cases for my county in Georgia. 6 days ago, we added 44 cases. Today, we added 87 cases. Steve Wolfbrand gives his war cry. She's a man. And Sandy Degg says, exactly. Steve says, ha ha ha. Avromano, otherwise known as Carmen Muniz, says, Steve Wolfbrand, laugh out loud. I knew you'd take the bait. And Case says, they want to kill us off, especially we poor folks. That's not a laughing matter, Kay. Steve says, Avromano, if you can't take a joke. Avromano said, I could have sworn I added laugh out loud and a laughing emoji. And Avril said, but there's no one that I will hold, Adolf Twitler accountable. Adolf Twitler. Kay says, yep, Biden is the worst. Clinton is no better, though. No, Clinton is better. I'm sorry to say. The mental capacity of Hillary Clinton has not actually deteriorated. She may have learned something from 2016. She may have learned she doesn't want to be an austerity monger. She may have learned she doesn't want to be a TPP monger. She may have learned that she doesn't want to negate Bernie Sanders' whole program, but be a gradualist. The Clintons are pragmatists. After all, her problem was that she arrogantly thought she could win in 2016 without actually offering people anything. I'm not advocating for Hillary Clinton. I can't stand Hillary Clinton. But Biden is in cognitive decline. There is no evidence that Hillary Clinton is in cognitive decline. It is dangerous to have a president of the United States who is in cognitive decline. More dangerous than having someone who is not in cognitive decline. That's got to be charge one. Getting somebody who cognitively is all there. Now, I'm not advocating for Hillary Clinton. I'm advocating for Biden to drop out and for Bernie Sanders to become the person, who is the nominee. And Avril says, I love your optimism, Dr. Kosher. Thanks. Dr. Kosher. Okay. Kay says, yep, Biden is the worst. Clinton is no better, though. Okay, and Lana says, what did Lana say? I can't catch it. Russ, that is terrible, so scary. It is terrible. They opened up Georgia, and the cases are increasing. I mean, these people are off their rockers. Sorry, it's taking me a while to go through this. I can't see much of the comments. I have to scroll them. They're no longer, when I usually read them, I read them from StreamYard. But StreamYard is having some trouble with Facebook today. They no longer are reproducing the comment thread for us. So I have to look at this, okay, in Facebook, and I don't have much comment space in Facebook. I might be able to gain a little more comment space by subtracting a little on the Zoom. That helps with the comment space somewhat, but of course it makes it harder for me to read the now much smaller print. But I will give it a go. I will give it a go. Okay. So Kay said the death totals are way undercounted anyway. No doubt there are dead people in their homes and apartments everywhere, not to mention in corporate in corporate-owned nursing homes. That could be. It is said that there is a substantial undercounting of deaths, but we don't know if that's 10,000 deaths or 15,000 deaths or what it is. Alvaro Romano says that's a hell of a horrible death. That senior is volunteering others for. Yeah. Steve says, please post any pictures of a pregnant, of a pregnant Mrs. Obama. Michelle Obama is what he actually said. And Russ Goldman said, yep, I'll be watching closely now that Kemp has turned things loose. Lana says, Avril, I saw a write-up yesterday about chiblains. I haven't heard that word since I was a kid. Case said, I saw reports that Florida is purposely undercounting death totals too. Over 1 million people 80 plus years old in Florida. And Avril says the COVID toes, right? And Sandy says COVID toes, question mark, yes. And the folks that keep track of that are being silenced. Oh, you mean the people who die and who have COVID toes? Is that what you're saying? Kay says, yes, I heard that, Avril. Oh, that may not be true. When news is suppressed, we get myths. And Lana says, yes, Sandy, COVID toes, chilblains. Oh, God. Avril says, what the hell has DT? Oh, God. Okay, I'm back. And where was I? I know, but I'm back already. Just hasn't caught up with it. Sorry, folks, it takes a little long till I find my place. And Avril says, what the hell has DT and the rest of the corrupt bastards bought stocks in the burial industry? And Lana says, state of Minnesota is doing pretty well, but we're on the upswing, not expected to peak for another month or so. Yep, I suspect that's true. I bet there are a lot of places. Damn. Okay, I'm back again, but okay, it's intermittent now, so I'll do the best I can do, and that will be that. You'll be able to hear it again. Russ says that was a good article by Tristram. Rob says, I'm feeling great. How are you, Lana? Okay, Lana says, how are you, Rob? I almost typed rib by mistake, face plant. Avril said, now I haven't heard Toe Jam since I was a kid. Rick says, think exotic animals are to blame for the coronavirus? Think again. There's an article in The Nation about habitat loss. Rob has said hello, and hey Yoda, hey Rob. Yet most of the survivors of COVID are going to need lifelong health care. Well, if it's very serious for them and they have to go on the ventilators and they still survive, they're going to need lifelong health care, right? So, going down the thread now, Russ says that was a good article by Tristram. Yeah, it was really an excellent article. It was very, very good. Alvaro Romano says economic safety net and stabilizer programs is the only way, right? And I've suggested how that can be done. And Steve says, but Duran. Avril says, there should be palladium coins. Why? You could mint one platinum coin and put $100 trillion into the mint's account. Okay, and then the Treasury could sweep the mint's account and put $100 trillion in the Treasury spending account. Could not spend $100 trillion, but it could pay off the whole national debt as it falls due, and it could also spend appropriations for this year and many years to come. That can be done with one coin. So why do we need any coins with a less expensive metal? Answer: we don't. Avril says, I think better start looking at videos about how to beat wood pulp into toilet paper. Sandy says, spring is coming, you can use leaves. Everyone could live on a basic income level. We could lessen the use of SNAP and other means-tested programs too. Okay. Also, Medicare for all, enhanced Medicare for all of the Bernie Sanders kind, okay, and the Jay Polk kind, would allow us to get rid of Medicaid too. Alvaro Romano says this loon platoon president thinks the market is going to save everything. For some reason, Facebook thinks my camera has gone off, but I can see that my camera is on. But anyway, should be coming back in a moment because, according to StreamYard, my camera is still on, and StreamYard is still on. Here I go. Good. Sandy says he should be charged with mass murder. And we have Marion MC joined. You're very welcome. Here, Marianne. And Romano says, our leaves in Florida aren't that big. I can just imagine wiping my butt with palm fronds. Oh, God. Avro, what an image. Avril says, love your optimism, Dr. Kosher. Okay. And Russ says, the Georgia leadership are theocratic. Okay. And a libertarian inspired. And Kay says, the idiot protesters are protesting all over Ohio now, too. Steve says, Harry isn't royal, Chelsea. Steve says, Michael Obama. Oh, and he laughs. And Joseph Evans, hi Joe Evans, says, Eminem and Oprah are replaced with clones. Want the world to end, shut down CERN, stop dream cloning. All the celebs and politicians are involved. Okay, YouTube, Donald Marshall for more info. By God Bless America. Steve says Michelle is a man, and Alvaro Romano says, I just thought that a palladium coin would be more valuable. I don't know anything about that, Alvaro. I was under the impression that platinum was still the most valuable, okay, of the metals. But we can look up what price platinum is going for now compared to palladium and compared to gold. But anyway, the law says it has to be platinum. So it's not an entirely relevant question. But here we are. I've gone through all the comments. So it's last call for comments right now. Mustafa Hajimar says, Michelle is a French name for a man. Yes, but Michelle is a French name for a woman. And that's how you spell Michelle Obama. So her name is certainly the female gender. Okay, I see my head is a little below the horizon. I don't know why that's the case. I'm going to refresh my screen and see if it still remains below the horizon, because it shouldn't. I am sitting up. Yes, it sees me sitting up now. Avril says, oh, okay, I stand corrected. Platinum. So platinum is still more valuable? As I said, I haven't checked recently. I just assumed that. Dolores says, thank you and good night. Thank you for coming, Dolores. And thank you for your meme at the start. I certainly appreciate that. And thank you for all the help that you provide to our live streams. And Lana, thank you as well. And thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Sandy. And thank you to all who help. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time. I'll be back on Monday night. I'll probably be back with more news. And then on Tuesday night, we're going to go over Michael Moore's film. We're going to go over Michael's film and what's right with it and all that's wrong with it. Kay says, thank you for a great discussion. She says, love you all night. We love you too, Kay. Thank you for coming, always contributing, and always being here. So good night, everyone. I'll be ending this. Alvaro says, great article. And commentary, Mua. Thanks. Sandy says, have a great night. Yeah, everybody have a great night. It's Saturday night. Saturday night's always a great night. Sandy says, ooh, goody. Evelina joined, and Avro says, love you more. Evelina says good night. I'm enjoying all the good nights. So, anyway, love you guys. Good night.